Thank you, Rebecca. First of all, thank you to ESCoE for giving me the opportunity to present here today. Just a little bit of background about myself. I am not an economist or nor a researcher. What I do come with is quite a lot of experience in working closely with our largest multinational bodies. What I hope to do today is share some of that learning with you, and in particular, how these large multinationals have due to their complex models that they set up on a global scale, present lots of challenges for national statistical institutes and for measuring our UK economy. As Rebecca said, I'm more than happy to take questions as we go through this event, so please feel free to stop me in my tracks if you've got any questions you'd like to ask. So the challenges are not new challenges. Globalisation of business is not a new challenge, but what I think is a little less explored is the practical, the real-life examples of these models and the practical challenges they bring for us for us from an ONS perspective in collecting the economic data from them. So what I'd like to do is present you today with some completely anonymised examples of these business structures and their implications for the collection of our survey data and more importantly, our main economic outputs. So I'm just going to run through today. So this should last about half an hour, but there's plenty of time for questions, so please ask. So I hope today to provide you with a short overview of what are these. So I should say, first of all, actually I head up ONS is newly formed. We've been up and running for about 18 months now, but we're still very early days, our international business unit. So we are working with, and the important thing here is working collaboratively with, a small number of very large multinationals. Now, they may be small in number, but these multinationals dominate some of the outputs that we have. So it's very important that we understand them and we collect the right statistical data for them. So more interestingly for you guys, I believe, is there, like you said, some real examples of these complex models and what they mean for the challenges for ONS, where we are in terms of the progress we've made and our future work plans. So as I mentioned, IBU was set up about 18 months ago now with the intention of better understanding the scale of which the globalisation of businesses is having an impact on the data, the survey data we collect, and as a result the ONS outputs and publications. These are just some of the aims. There are more aims than this. I should note at this point, we're not alone in these challenges. These challenges are faced by all statistical institutes and authorities across the world. The administrative data and survey data that we collect only tells part of the story, and really to understand how these businesses are working, you've got to ask them very intelligent-led questions to get that full picture of what they are doing and what that means for the data that we collect from them. Now, other statistical institutes have set up very similar units. Some have been going up for a little while now, some are more newly formed, like the one in ONS. We've called ours International Business Unit, but they're more commonly referred to across Europe on the international level as large cases units. It's also important that we cannot do this work in isolation. In order to understand what we need from a UK perspective, we need to understand what's happening at the global level as well, to make sure that we're reflecting the UK part accurately. So it's really important that actually we're working at where we can and where data sharing legislation allows, that we're working with our counterpart organisations, counterparts, large cases unit, to make sure that we've got a consistent view of these global companies across the world. We should also say that many of our large businesses find it quite challenging for us to complete some of our survey data, mainly because they don't recognise themselves as being, for example, a UK business. They're a global business, and they find it quite challenging to separate some of those data for us just to reflect the UK part. So really they don't recognise the boundaries as we want to do for our own national statistics. So for the last 18 months, IBU have been working with approximately 25 large multinationals. When I say working with, we meet with them regularly. We speak to them probably weekly over the phone and via email, where we can obviously securely. Often this data is very confidential. To really better understand what they're doing and to support them in the completion of these surveys. And ultimately, our main goal here is to improve the recording of these businesses for our national statistics. Is there any questions so far? I should also say, just as important as improving the quality, is these small numbers, as I mentioned, dominate our statistics. So it's really important that we build strong and trusting relationships up with these companies. They are very dynamic. They are buying and selling companies, they are relocating, and therefore it's important for this unit to have a more proactive approach to make sure that we are on top of all of these changes, that we're keeping abreast of the change in, these changing structures and making sure that we're accurately recording them against our statistics. So some of these terms and aspects you may well be familiar with. Factors, goods producing, contract manufacturing, the cross-border use of intellectual property. Where Internet in IBU is coming in is we are finding the real examples of such models through the work we are doing, interpreting them and making sure that, like you said, we're correctly structuring them in order we're sending the right forms to the right businesses. I know that sounds quite straightforward, but with these large companies you'll get a flavour as to why that's quite challenging for us to do. We should also note here that these are our sort of statistical terminology. These are quite alien to a lot of our big companies. They all use their own languages and so forth. So if you, for example, if you went to them and talked about contract manufacturing, that means something different to our large companies as well. So the first job for us is actually to translate these elements to the business world.
So,
Yeah.
I find that very difficult to believe. I mean, these are companies that have been A, doing this, and B, dealing with statistical forms, not only yours, but every other statistics office, certainly in Europe, if not the world. If they don't know by this time what you mean, they must be bankrupt. I mean, they must be remarkably stupid. I mean, I can see that if you were setting this up in 1969 instead of 2019, you might have one or two problems. I mean, these are things certainly I've been asking companies about since the 70s. So I can't believe the statistics offices haven't. I mean, new companies are always a problem, I know that. But I can't believe that there any existing big company would have any trouble with any of these terms.
I think in terms of the terms, I think when you explain to them, for example, the contract manufacturing, is that of course they completely understand. But with that word contract manufacturer, what that means for our purposes is different to how they interpret it from their
end. But it means the same thing for you as it did last year to you, and the year before to you, and they filled in the form then.
Yes, that's right, yes. I think our question is, don't necessarily focus on these terminology actually. They don't ask them at this present time if they're a contract manufacturer, but we'll ask them they will ask them for their activity, for example. Which, if you bear with me, I think the next couple of slides will explain why there are challenges in interpretation of that. It's not so much like you said, they'll be familiar obviously transfer pricing, it's business accountancy, but I think it's more so that the questionnaires themselves, it's very difficult to explain some of these concepts in the standard questionnaire that they've got at the moment. So I think the next couple of examples will demonstrate why some of the these companies find it quite challenging. Thank you for your question. Any more at this stage? Okay. So I quite like showing this slide, and I'm not expecting you to be able to see anything or read anything on this slide. So this is a real structure chart of a manufacturing company. And each of those boxes is an active legal entity operating across the world. Like I said, in this case, there are 384 active legal units spanning 34 countries. Now this is our starting point. Before we even start to look at any of the data that we get back to these companies, we need to make sure that we're reflecting this structure. So this is the global structure. About half of these units are UK, and the other half are across the world. Now this is particularly important for us, first of all, to make sure we are classifying these businesses correctly and that we are sending the right questionnaires to the right parts of the group and asking them the right questions. It's also particularly important for our international surveys in terms of our foreign direct investment. It's important that they show the ownership structure here, so we know, for example, where ultimately the immediate, the ultimate investment is coming from. Each of those boxes each of those colours reflects the business's operating segments. Now, from an ONS perspective, we would never want to survey every single UK entity here. There's hundreds of them. So what we do is often where we try to align the reporting structure with the different coloured segments here. Often they are consolidated elements within their accounts that reflect their different operating segments. So it makes sense where we can that we align our reporting structure, our collection, with the business's operating segments. So before we even start to look at any data variables that we come back, we make sure that we are accurately recording every element on here. It should be noted, however, this is just a point in time. This changes quite on a regular basis, and this structure chart is a year old now, and it has changed significantly. This particular business is heavily restructured in the last year, and so you've got to keep pace with this with these companies. Hence why it's so important that you can maintain this regular contact with them. I should also note this is probably a medium-sized group. They get a lot bigger than this. I couldn't possibly cram it all onto one page, but they probably get as twice as big as this, in particular some of the financial companies and also those businesses, oil and gas companies. We're talking a lot more legal entities across more countries. Is there any questions about that slide?
Sarah,
yes.
So you said that other countries have these large case units in their statistical offices. So say you were talking to this company and you know half of it is in the UK and half is elsewhere. So would you then actively talk to the other NSI, make sure you operate with a similar picture? Is that how it works?
Yes, yes. So we engage with, the International Business Week is engage with our counterparts across Europe. So only at the European level I should allow that. There's legislation that allows us to share information at a European level. We feed into what's called the Eurogroups register, which is a register of all the active legal units in the UK, and we sort of feed all of this information to our Eurogroups register in the hope that we'll draw some consistencies across Europe for those legal entities. So this is actually, when we go to visit the companies, this is the starting point for us. Most of these companies have such a structure in place. The only issue you have is, like you said, normally they're only released on an annual basis, maybe because they change. But this is just our starting point. Any more questions about it? I talked about activities. Really important, actually, that within these, a lot of these entities will be holding companies and special purpose entities. So they look, from our perspective, they look quite small in terms of employment and revenue, for example. But these are the entities that we probably want to focus our efforts on in some respect, because they're the ones that will hold, for example, the intellectual property assets, income from royalties. They'll also be those ones where there's large financial flows coming through them. So for our foreign direct investment surveys and some of our investment surveys, it's really important that we understand what all of these entities are doing to make sure we're capturing the right data from them. So, bear with me because this is a little bit complicated to explain, but this is a real case study of a manufacturing business that we've researched over the last sort of year or so. So I'm going to take you through it step by step of what that means for our statistics really. So we analysed all of this administrative survey data for this company, but then we met with the Director of Finance, he had a really good understanding of the whole group. One of the challenges we face here is that through a multinational company, it's very difficult to identify the person who really understands the whole group. You'll be very surprised how you're nodding. You'll have several parts of this group, and they're experts in their own part of that group, but know little about the other part. So often we have to go and visit lots and lots of different people at these groups to get that whole picture. So in this case, we were really fortunate because we met the finance director who had a real sort of obviously had a very, very good understanding of how the group operated. In this particular example, I'm only focusing on 2 UK legal entities. There are over 30 legal entities in this group. I just wanted to focus on the 2 because I think it draws up some nice examples of the implications it has for a wide range of our statistics. So in this case, the larger UK entity, the larger UK map, is what we call a contract manufacturer. So this owns all of the raw materials, all of the intellectual property for the development of that product and the final output. However, it's more cost efficient for them to have the actual goods manufactured, in this case, in factories across Europe. So from a UK perspective, they buy the goods, the raw materials from a global supplier. This is also a subsidiary of the group, so I should say all of the elements on here are within a multinational group. So they buy in from a global supplier. Now interestingly, the raw materials will enter the UK, across the UK border. So the UK is the company itself calls this the global supply hub. So they buy all of the raw materials in. Those raw materials are then physically exported, in this case, to what we call toll processors across Europe. The UK pays these factories for carrying out that service. Now we'll pick up that via our import of a service data that is collected by our international trade and services data. So we're picking up that import of a manufacturing service. Now interestingly, when the goods are finally produced, they're then sold to global wholesaling hubs across the UK. But interestingly, some of those finished goods will re-enter the UK to be sold to the UK consumer. Just to add a little bit more complexity, the UK entity there's a separate UK entity that sells those goods. So there's a transaction, a payment of finished goods between the 2 UK entities as well. So it's good to understand that in terms of understanding some of the questionnaires, the data that comes back. So why does that create some challenges? First challenge it creates is that from an employment perspective, the UK, the people in the UK from an activity perspective are wholesaling and in head office activities. There's no manufacturing of this product physically in the UK. So it creates some classification issues for us because from an employment perspective, you want to report the activity of what they're doing, which in this case is the wholesale and head office. But from an output perspective, because they own all of the manufacturing process and activities, they're a contract manufacturer. So at present, from a standard industrial classification perspective, there's nothing that reflects that contract manufacturing activity. So there's conflict there between, like you said, from an employment perspective and from an output perspective. Does anyone have any questions about that first particular issue? Okay. I think so that's the first one. The second one, this in particular impacts trade. So now most of this can be captured merchanted goods as merchanted goods, as all of the raw materials are exported, and then they're further exported then to the global warehousing. So actually, in terms of this case, national accounts will take account for the goods processed and sold abroad. We know this as merchanting. So for our trade statistics, we net the import of the finished goods and the export of the raw materials, and then use the ITIS data, which captures the total manufacturing fees, to reflect the higher value of goods. However, in this case, the value we wouldn't be able to net off because there's this finished goods re-enter the UK. So there's some implications for our trade data here because it's not all of it is merchanted goods. But it's only by speaking to the director of this company do you understand that this is what is happening within this multinational and the implication it has for our trade statistics. Is there any questions about that?
Does in the top slides, does the raw material, does the ownership show?
No.
Then it still belongs to the UK?
It always belongs to the UK, that's right, yes. So there's difference here between the physical movement of the goods versus the ownership of the goods. So until this point, these global wholesalers will buy it off the UK entity, but only at that point is there a change of economic ownership, and we would want to reflect it. So we do, in national accounts, the trade team do take account for this, because they, like you said, they net off the outgoing raw materials and the payments of the finished goods, and then they take in consideration the toll processing fees to reflect the change in value of the goods, because obviously they're more expensive as a finished good than they are more value than a finished good than they are a raw material. However, what they can't obviously consider at the time, without going into this detail and researching it, is that actually some of these finished goods come back into the UK.
This might not be very relevant to this role, but I'm wondering, so in this whole process, in this case, where do you see innovation would be generated?
In terms of research and development?
Both, like investment and output.
In terms of investment, in terms of output?
Output, I mean like patents, intellectual property.
So yes, that's a really good point. So in terms of intellectual property, the UK is all held in the UK. So the both from a research perspective, it's from an activity perspective, it's researching the activities here, and the ownership of the patents and so forth is all remains within the UK in this instance. So both the funder of the R&D and both the activity is all reflected in the UK. And we will be picking up that through our surveys, because that is selected for our research and development survey. So from an R&D investment perspective, we'll be picking it up.
Would it be possible for this kind of like knowledge creating happening in another place, but then it just belongs to the UK?
Absolutely. And I'll come on to another example of that in a couple of slides' time, where we show the difference between the funder, the owner, and the activity of R&D as well. Why that creates some challenges.
One question. So even though these are all firm internal transactions, you say that the International Trade and Services Survey would still pick up these contract manufacturing fees as imports or exports?
Yes.
Or imports of a service?
An import of a service.
It would still be there even though it's all happening within the same firm?
Yes. On the questionnaires, again, this is one of the challenges of the questionnaires. It's very challenging for us, I suppose, to be able to exactly say what we're after here. But yes, it does say that it asks for intercompany transactions as well as, so we include, as soon as anything crosses the border, we want to reflect whether that's a subsidiary or outside of the group, we want to record that as an import and export of our service.
At the same time, the foreign subsidiary will be using some of the intellectual property in terms of the R&D and or patents and so on. So in that sense, there must be then an export of IP for which the foreign subsidiary must be paying some sort of royalty.
Yeah.
Is that recorded anywhere?
Not perfectly. I think the next couple of slides will come on to that issue really. And I think what we should say as well, we very much focused on, in this example, we very much focused on just looking at the trades and goods and the services in terms of the goods as well, rather than the actual intellectual property. But I think it's an evolution. When we meet with these companies, we want to build trusting relationships up with them, so we start with understanding their model and move on to maybe more of the sensitive questions relating to intellectual property, the ownership of it, the funder of it, and so forth. But yes, you are right. I think we would be right to assume there would be exports. There would be an export of services in terms of the use of the intellectual property. Any more questions about that example? What I should say as well is that this is just one type of product as well. So what we found is that the reason I've only shown part of this group is because businesses will have different operating models for different products. So you can see that, where the complexity comes in here, because sometimes they'll own a product right from the, like you said, they'll own the product right from the raw materials through to its final output. In some cases, they might part own of that product. It might own a partly completed product and so forth. And each potentially, we've come across a couple of examples where there are hundreds of products and models to suit each of those products. So you can see why the whole aim of the International Business Unit is actually that in order to collect the right data from them, you've got to firstly understand their models and then tailor the question or the data collection method and the questions that we ask them to their model. So a standard questionnaire at the moment creates us some challenges in order to correctly reflect these companies. This is a little bit of an easy example to demonstrate, but it's pretty much the same example as previously, but in reverse. So we also have examples here where in this case the UK entity is the toll processor. So its Dutch parent, which is the supply chain business, owns all of the, again, raw materials, intellectual property. In this case, the UK, in this case, the intellectual property is held by the Dutch parent. In this case, the challenge it created for us was the fact that this entity is classified to manufacturing, but actually most of its revenue is generated from its wholesale activity. In terms of the revenue it makes from the toll processing, this is really just carrying out a service on behalf of the Dutch parent. So the Dutch parent pays a toll manufacturing fee, which is on a cost basis, but also there's some markup in terms of some profit. The challenge we had with this particular company is we had to ensure that we were correctly recording both those activities, because they were providing data to us based on the fact they were buying and selling and wholesaling, but we weren't actually picking up the toll manufacturing fee, which is quite important because that's the actual fee related to the manufacturing activity. So this is how we were working with them to understand this model. This is the slide where we've had a couple of questions relating to intellectual property. So I think the issue here is that we have come across an example where the economic owner of R&D output within an M&E can be different from its performer. So this is again a real example. Thus, in this case, the R&D asset is not necessarily found in the balance sheet of the entity actually physically carrying out the activity. So in this case, the UK entity carries out contract R&D service. So it's paid by its parent company to carry out contract R&D. So interestingly, when we discussed this with the group, we asked the question about the economic owner of R&D, which is something, again, that's not really familiar to them. But we were trying to better understand this model. So we asked the UK who funds it. Now, they see themselves as funding it, interestingly. They fund it because they carry out the research and then cost that back to the American parents. So they carry out the activity first and then sort of bill the American company for carrying out that service. So this is where the language comes in. It's a bit difficult sometimes to explain this to companies. So we, for example, on our research and development survey, asked for the economic owner of R&D. Now, interestingly, some businesses see themselves as the funder of R&D, but actually it's only by analysing the company accounts and all of the administrative data and having intelligent-led conversations with these companies can you begin to understand a slightly different picture. So in this case, there's 3 development centres in the UK, but all those development centres are funded by the American parent. Now, interestingly, where's the output of that R&D activity? So in this case, you've got an Irish subsidiary in the mix here, which creates, so this Irish subsidiary is the European supply chain activity. But actually, in terms of where the final income from the intellectual property, in this case, the final income of the asset of intellectual property is actually ends up in the Cayman Islands. So I think the challenge here is, like you said, is that the performer of the R&D, which is the UK, the funder, which is the US, and the output are 3 different businesses, 3 entities across 3 countries. Now, the question is often raised, who is the economic owner of the R&D? Now, I'm not in the best place to answer that. I think this topic is widely debated about how you record, or where the economic owner of research and development is. But this is just some of the challenge. This is just an example of where there are challenges in recording that. So just a couple of questions. You may say, why such a model in this case? Obviously, from a UK perspective, we've got a high skill set in research and development in the UK. And not only that, obviously, there are quite a few benefits. For example, there are government tax credits that are given to our research and development for promise. You actually see this model quite a lot within the UK because they're funded by an overseas parent, but actually the activity is here. But then you said it's the questions about where the economic ownership of that research and development is. Any questions on that?
I don't quite follow how Ireland subsidiary is going to use the innovation output produced by the UK subsidiary.
Okay. I think in this case, I'm not sure they use the output as such. It's just the fund in terms of the flow. I think that they come through the Irish entity and then up to the Canary Islands entity. So
is that kind of innovation output embedded in the pools and transferred between UK and Ireland?
Yes, I think so. But in terms of from a balance sheet perspective, the assets are not shown in any of, the assets are not shown here. The challenge we have is that you can't, this is one of the big challenges of the global challenge that all statistical institutes is that you're very restricted in terms of what you can see on a global level, in terms of the accounts from a global level. From a UK perspective, there's no R&D asset on that balance sheet there.
Well, could you see like UK subsidiary own a patent coming out of the R&D investment? Would you be able to see that?
No. In terms of, well, in terms of what's coming back on of surveys or what is recorded on the company accounts balance sheet. In terms of how we record that at the moment, for our research and development survey, would capture that as the sort of expense as an asset here, because our R&D survey asks for is activity based. So our in terms of how that feeds our national accounts, for example, so that we will record that the R&D activity as an asset, or that would feed, for example, our gross fixed GSCS survey and then into GDP. So that's where we are at the moment. Is the fact we would record it here, but actually there's some questions about where that should be reported. Does that answer your question?
Yes, because I'm just wondering, since R&D is conducted within the UK,
it is, yes.
And if any output, would that be registered with the UK IPR registration or with Ireland?
So at the moment, from a UK perspective, even though when you look at the from an accounts perspective, there's no asset there. But from a data collection perspective, we currently presently record that as an asset. I think for us as well, we are quite early days in understanding this. Like I said, I think for us we want to build relationships up before we start to ask before we ask questions about intellectual property. But they're very open with us when they do tell us it. It's just very complex sometimes. We have to look at a lot of data and, like you said, better understand these groups. So those are a couple of examples. There are plenty more to show. We, like I said, of the 25 multinationals we've looked at in quite some depth, there are all those types of models going on. Like I said, different products will have different models and so forth. So this is just a little bit about how we do it, how we work with them, how we engage with them. As I mentioned earlier, getting hold of the right person is a challenge in itself. We often try to secure buy-in from the Chief Finance Officer or a director at the office, just to explain a little bit about what we're doing. Then we do a lot of analysis. We do a research and we look at all of the survey data that's coming back for us. We look at all the administrative data that we hold to try and put up a picture of what we know so far. We look at all sorts of data, a huge number of data variables when we do this. We do a lot of consistency checking across the surveys to make sure we've got a coherent picture for the groups. And then we prepare for a visit. Now when we visit with them, the important thing is we've got trained qualified accountants on board with us. So these accountants, like I said, there are two different worlds here, the statistical world and the accountancy world. And those accountants are crucial to bridging that gap between the two worlds. And so we will always take the accountants with us and speak, like you said, speak the same language. And we, based on all the information that we know, we ask them very intelligent-led questions around their more operating model. Often we'll show very similar diagrams to that. We'll present that to them and say, is this how you operate? And it's sort of a quality assurance process. As a result of that, what do we do next? Often there's lots of actions on both sides in terms of often you'll find no one person within the office will have all the questions that we need to understand. So they'll go off to the different teams, the trade team, the tax accountants, the HR department and so forth to be able to collect this together or bring it all together. We've made some improvements to the quality of the data as a result of it. Like you said, we recognise the need that we need to tailor our questions to these multinationals. Each multinational is presented us with a different operating model. Therefore, the standard questionnaires that we ask them, we need to reflect we really need to understand their models and then ask those questions to reflect their model. When I say tailored questionnaires, the long-term approach for the unit is actually we probably get a direct data feed from them, asking all the variables, all the questions, all of the data variables that we need from them. And actually, the companies themselves are really willing to do that. They're very forthcoming in wanting to provide us with all the data. We've just got to be more clear about what we're actually asking for from them. And then for some of the changes, obviously these companies dominate some of the statistics. Some of the industries they're in and the statistics that are produced as a result of them. And so therefore we do a lot of work internally to make sure that all the different statistical areas understand what those changes are, and we have a consistent implementation of those changes across our statistical domains.
Just a couple of reactions to this slide in particular. The one is, as you say, high quality accountancy expertise is pretty important in this area, particularly where you've got these hundreds of bodies. I remember when we reclassified Lloyd's banking group, they had difficulties a few years ago. They have 2,200 subsidiaries, so I'm not at all surprised by those companies' chancellorship. But ONS traditionally hasn't had high quality accountancy qualifications in depth. Is that still an issue, or will we need to invest further in just having more people to spread around, as it were?
I agree with you. I think outside our accountancy department, there's only been a few accountants previously. However, I'd like to think things are moving forward. Yeah. So I've got 2 accountants on my team that plans to expand. But, however, there's a couple of other areas of economic statistics in particular supporting some of the development work with accountants on board, which is really important for ONS, because when we're developing redeveloping our surveys, you've got to have, like you said, the accountant's perspective on those questionnaires. You can't, you need to make sure that we still collect what we want from a statistical purpose, but you're translating it as something that's more meaningful. If you're asking me honestly, I think we could do with a lot more accountants. I think they are crucial, considering at the moment, presently, most of the data that we collect is via our, economics, via our surveys. I think there's a real role here from the businesses themselves. There's a real important role to be filled in making sure that we bridge that gap between the two worlds.
That was actually the other point that occurred to me from this. I mean, in your second box, where you talk about the analysis and the knowledge, which I can see is a really important part of having a sensible conversation about this. It seems to me what you really need to do is and I think it's exactly the way to go, by the way. I'm makes them aware of what they're doing. But it seems to me what we actually need, what awareness needs, is to have the capability almost like company analysts would have in a financial institution, where you know an awful lot about each of those 25 or however many it is companies. So some of the information may well be from other surveys and other information in ESCoEs, but the other source of information is actually a much wider category of what's in the Financial Times or what's in the trade journals or what are the issues that other people are aware of that actually we may not from traditional sources be aware of. Do we have plans to turn ourselves into sort of company analysts? Or?
As part of, I can speak from an IBU perspective and our future plans.
I mean in that context, yeah.
Yes. I think for us, we recognise, I think across the office they recognise the value of this such a unit, that it brings to the wide range of statistics. And so the good news for us and the team is there are plans to expand. And in that, you have got a mixture of accountants, importantly researchers, I think as well. Researchers in the point of, like you just mentioned, there's a lot of subject material and topics, that's out there. Like you said, this is a problem, this is a global problem, everybody's out there. So I think there's a need for someone to research that, but again, be on top of all of the information in all of the media and so forth. So a mixture of accountants, researchers. National accounts is a huge part of this. Now, you asked me a lot of questions earlier about our national accounts, and I'm from a data collection perspective, and I think there's an acknowledgement that we need to engage with quite a large range of stakeholders from our National Accounts Department to understand the implications on our national accounts of these models. So it's not just understanding the groups, it's understanding what we actually want to collect based on these models. So there's naturally need some national account expertise within the team, and our data analysts. There's a huge amount of data here from all different sources that really want to bring together, understand what these, there are differences and sometimes there are right to be differences, but to really understand what we've got and identify any errors or inconsistencies we've got. So it's very much going forward, this team, and there's the plans for a 35 strong team to manage 100 multinational companies in this way. And they're a mixture of skill sets from account managers, being experts in the businesses. You've got to be effectively communicating with these large companies in a quite a sensitive, but also, like you said, to have the accountants on board with you, but also then to have that national accounts experience and the data analysis side. So quite a diverse skill set, really, that you need to go forward. Any more questions?
I'm wondering, will this kind of data be ever available for researchers, or they will be always confidential?
Yes, I believe all the information that we collect is very much confidential under the Statistical Trade Act. It can be shared, but it can only be shared for statistical purposes. So I'm not sure where the boundaries are in terms of researchers. Obviously, I think there's a way of applying for such information. The information in terms of structure and so forth is always fed back to our internal departmental business register, which is the main economic sampling frame for all our business surveys. And I know that in certain circumstances, researchers have access to that data. Obviously, the reasons these companies are very willing, we make it very clear when we speak to these companies that all the information they tell us is for statistical needs only, and it's never shared, for example, with other, the information in particular is not shared for other than statistical purposes. So we make that clear whenever we present them. So in terms of some of the information, a lot of the valuable stuff is not within the data, it's with the information that surrounds the data. So, and I think that's a little bit more challenging too. That's probably more where the sensitivities are. So, yeah.
In your team, are you developing industry expertise and sharing that with the other statistical offices? Because it strikes me to be quite easy for a company dealing with someone who didn't know much about the production of widgets and the outsourcing of widgets to run rings around it, to put it.
Yes, absolutely.
Whereas if you've got an industry expert on widgets and he's talking to the German and the Dutch and the whatever experts, and their numbers, are they consistent when something's outsourced from the Netherlands to you.
Yeah.
About
And
how much cross-checking can you do to make sure they're telling you the same things?
Good question.
Which doesn't necessarily mean it's the truth, but at least it's
Yeah.
a step towards the truth.
I think in terms of, I agree with you, and I think when I mention these examples, what you need to do is make sure that the other countries are reflecting the activities in the reverse. And I think so it's really important that actually where we can share data, you know, at the moment we can share from a European
I think
perspective.
that was the next question. Is,
Yes.
will that change after some unknown date in the future?
In terms of what we can do, we can share data. We can share data through existing European regulation. I can't answer what that picture will look like in the future, but at present that EU regulation allows us to share microdata between our constituent parts across Europe. Interestingly, it says data. Some of the information, like you said, some of the interesting thing is more the information about the models and so forth, and that's a little less clear. So we share a lot of microdata with them, which tells us the full story, but in some cases it can be a bit challenging to share some of the information with them. In our case, we ask the businesses themselves if they are happy for us to share this information with other countries, and they're willing to do so. More interestingly, you can see the benefits of working on a particular group with other counterparts. And there was a recent publication that our counterpart units in Germany and France did on a particular manufacturing company recently, where it took them 2 years to do this, but both those statistical institutes looked at that group and met centrally. So they visited the group together and met the contact centrally to understand the whole European perspective and making sure that they're reflecting the correct data in the different parts. And I think that's something that we as a unit would like to do, take forward, where you study these groups collectively to make sure you've got a clear picture of them. So yes, we do share, and it's important we share where we can. We're involved with a couple of European initiatives which allows us to do that at the moment. So, and it's very, very useful to do. And also that is such a complex area. There's so many lessons that we're learning from what the other authorities are doing as well. So, does that answer your question? So where do we take it next? So I say 40 multinationals. We've done about 25 in some depth now to understand those models, but we've picked up about 40 in terms of just resolving some particular issues that some of our survey areas have had, in terms of like maybe there's been quite large restructures and so forth. But we have strong working relationships with probably about 20 of those companies, where we're meeting them and visiting them regularly. They come to visit us in some cases as well. What I should say is the last 18 months has mainly been learning about all these different models and how they are having an impact on the data that we're collecting from them. Like you said, we have made some improvements to the quality of the survey data coming in. A lot of learning and working with other statistical institutes. So we're involved with 2 initiatives, European initiatives at the moment. One is called Eurostat, is sponsored by Eurostat, and it's called an early warning system. The idea of this is that we take as proactive approach as possible to the restructuring of large companies. So if one country, through their press and so forth, has indicated this company is potentially going to restructure, it's a notification to the partnering countries that this may happen and you may want to monitor it. It's a really good initiative. It's completely voluntary at the moment. So. But in terms of, again, trying to work collectively together, that's been an initiative. There's also been some work by Eurostat's gross national income. They obviously, like you said, this is a global challenge, in particular affects our European statistics as well. So the GNI team within Eurostat have initiated a pilot looking at 25 multinationals in some detail as well. So we've been sharing data and information about those 25. It's reassuring from an ONS perspective because you can see the challenges everyone faces. It's not just us alone, you can see the challenges that are coming from the other countries as well in terms of these issues.
And the limitations of the Eurostat system, and indeed of the Eurogroup register we talked about before, is that the world doesn't end at the borders of the European Union. So some of the bigger challenges, some of the bigger issues may not be within those existing systems.
And I think there are lots and lots of initiatives at the moment, I gather, from the international level as well. So it's how we best tap into them. So we talked earlier about OECD creating a new database called DEMA, which is a complete list of all legal entities across the ruling associated variables. So it's making sure that we work on that international level as well, because like you said, it doesn't stop at the European borders. But at the moment, there's no legislation that allows us to share anything apart from lessons learned, really, at this stage. But I think in order for this to work, and if it ought, we have huge ambitions, I know, but if you want a consistent view of these multinationals across the world, then you've got to we need to have our data legislation, sharing legislation in place. So.
Is there any vehicle across countries to coordinate the work? So obviously you've got your unit, other countries will too. If you go to the OECD Stats Working Party, people present on IBU. If you went to the National Accounts one, the same.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of potential for coordination? I'm not sure what your route in might be.
Yes, interestingly, not at present. However, I think at the last, again, only at a European level, but the last Director General's Conference, the GDIN's conference, which was last November, we talked about globalisation, all the issues of globalisation, and they strongly recommended a network of such units. Yeah, that we set up and organised. The recommendation first was all national statistics institutes to adopt such a model, because like I said, the admin and the survey, the administrative and the survey data will only tell you so much, and really you've got to have such a unit to be able to fully understand the impact of these companies. But that is only sort of under a European branch. But further than that, as far as I'm aware, I'm not sure of any global initiatives to link up all of this work together. It needs it though. So.
And more practically thinking, I mean, you started these investigations on these 40 MNEs. You've got some analysis capability. Are you getting any kind of sense at the moment, or perhaps it's too early, as to how sorting some of these things out might actually impact, I don't know, trade flows or GDP, or will they all be offsetting each other, or will there be a systematic?
Yes. That's a really good question, because I think for us, it's very challenging for us to, but we're only working business to business. And so it's quite difficult for us to sum up what that actually means further down the line. Obviously, from when the point where the data comes in at the source data, I can give you the impact of the source data. So I can tell you, for example, how much improvement we made to this particular data field coming in as a result of the work we're doing. But of course, that data then feeds the different stages within our office. Obviously, you've got our grossing and our adjustments that we make to the data. Where we can, though, we have seen some small changes to improvements. Whether that's ever offset is offset, like it's very difficult to say. In some cases it will offset, because within the same industry you'll have offsetting in place. But for us, we can only, from an IBU perspective, we can only work at the microdata level, the survey microdata level. But there is more work we are looking to work with our National Accounts colleagues to better understand what that means for our final outputs.
I mean, you're probably capturing additional flows of either goods or services that you've not seen before, so I guess you'd expect those to increase in some way.
Yes, and we have seen, like you say, we are working closely with our trading goods and our trading services, presenting these models to them, ensuring that we are collecting the right data, and that data is then feeding through the different channels. We want to better understand what that means for our colleagues, and we're doing, we are, based on what we're doing now, we are working with them to understand that going forward. I suppose, like you said, most of the work we've done is just learning, and learning about the business models. I suppose the next big chunk of work we're focusing on is how that then feeds our outputs and our results areas.
Is there a report that we could access to see the findings of your group?
In terms of, yes, I think in terms of, obviously completely anonymised. But in terms of what we've learned about the complexity of these models and how these models.
Summary of what your group is finding.
Yes. If I were to direct you, I presented something very similar to the economic review back in January, and as part of that, there was a paper that was published that talked about a little bit about the unit and what some of the challenges we've got, some of the examples. I'm more than happy to circulate that paper.
That would be excellent. Thank you.
No problem at all. I think I probably mentioned some of this before. So at the moment, we send the same questionnaires to the smallest businesses as we do the very largest. It's just one of the challenges we have. We recognise that for our very largest, we need to ask them in a bit more specific for them, taking into consideration their models. So we have been recently tailoring our questionnaires to be able to pick up. So for example, when we talked about the toll processing model, we didn't specifically in any of our questionnaires refer to like the toll manufacturing service they carry out. So we have a lot of industry type surveys as well. So in this case, we were sending the manufacturing questionnaire to them, but obviously a lot of their activities recorded as wholesale. So we've tailored the questionnaire to account for both those activities to make sure we're picking up the right data from for example, index of services. These are our gross domestic product survey. We will continue to strengthen the relationships with our respondents of these large companies. And really further research. I feel like even though I've presented this to you, we're still scratching at the surface of these companies. So further research, we've recently looking at some of the cloud technology companies. We're working with a couple of the big players in the UK, just to better understand sort of what kind of activities we're talking about the cloud, and there's all sorts of implications for a wide variety of areas in terms of how we record the digital economy. Again, more work on intellectual property. There's a lot more that we can do in understanding, like you said, those differences between the owner and the funder of intellectual property, particular R&D. There's some work we've done on the sharing economy companies as well, better understanding the implications for us of these, I'm not commenting their names, but what we call the sharing economy companies. And like I said, I mentioned earlier, the importance of our holding companies. They look very small from a output perspective here, but we know those are key. Some of those businesses are key, in particular holding some of the assets of intellectual property, but also, like you said, special purpose entities where there's large flows of income in the country. It may well be that they come straight into the UK and then back out of the UK in terms of, I think they call that as offshore special purpose entities. So really, lots more research, I think. It takes time. It takes time. You can see just from like the complexity of the structure to begin with, to the point of engaging with the right contacts, to looking through all the admin, all of the data that we hold for them takes time. We're early days, but so I think, like you said, there are other countries that have just started these units up as well, so we're trying to learn as much as we can from them. I hope that's given a flavour. I'm sure this is just the start. It feels like we've got a long way to go, but I hope you find it interesting.
Thank you very much. Do you mind if I ask, when you pursue the tailored data collection approach, sort of account management approach with the larger, a bit more complex businesses, presumably they need to be agreeable to your approaches. Do you encounter, is that generally the case, or do you sometimes encounter a resistant approach, or a challenge to you as to, are you using your statistical powers appropriately, that kind of thing?
So in terms of our statistics, in terms of the legally obviously they have to, under the Statistical Terminology, complete our surveys and send them back to us. Now interestingly, we come across very little resistance in terms of tailored questionnaires and from, for example, direct data feeds, for a few reasons really. First of all, we still put a huge amount of burden on our big companies. in terms of, so for example, they'll often be selected for or sampled for maybe 20, 25 different economic surveys, which are a mixture of monthly, quarterly and annual surveys. So in some cases, I think one of the big manufacturers, we send over 1,000 questionnaires to them. So, so there's real gains to be had in working with it in this approach for them, in terms of reducing that burden. Not only that, they do struggle, like I said, in some cases to answer some of those questions on our surveys based on the complex models that they have. So more generally, they're very, very willing to, one, like you said, work closely with us, and secondly, to look at different methods of collecting the data from them. It should be said though, it's not as easy as just taking a direct dump, extract of their account. One business recently did, and it scared us a little bit because it was just a huge data set, absolutely huge data set, and it was for us then to work out what we needed. So when I first started this work, I thought direct data views was the way to go, but actually it may well be we need to be a bit more specific about what we want, otherwise we're going to get everything. But in terms of some businesses though, it very much depends on the company in terms of its structure. In some cases they've got a central accounting system which will allow them to give it all in one go. Others, they might have 20 different accounting systems, and therefore in order to get all the bits and pieces, they still have to do it all separately for us. So this is where you work with them to find a balance really, to make the process as efficient as we can for them, but still collecting high quality level of data coming in as well. So I think for us, it's finding that medium ground really. Does that answer your question?
Sounds fantastic. There's that saying, isn't there? We're from the government and we're here to help.
Yeah.
Yes. And one's led to believe that that often isn't a welcome approach, but you're, yeah.
I think we are very fortunate to be allowed to, to be able to offer that to them really, and the fact that, I think that in an ideal world we wouldn't be sending them 1,000 questions a year, but the fact that we are at the moment and says to you, we're going to send 1,000 questionnaires to you, let's actually work out what we really need from you based on your model. And you maybe, the approach that we're working to actually is that you might have a monthly questionnaire which will pick up all our monthly data, a quarterly one, which will, and an annual survey which will pick up all the elements that we need. Like you said, it depends business to business and whether they can or can't do that, but it's got to be an improvement as to, in terms of what they currently do.
So I'm sure, Sarah, if you have a few minutes to hang around if there's further questions,
yes,
but we've sort of booked this for about an hour, so please join me in thanking Sarah for a fascinating presentation.